Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into something that completely reshaped the world. We're looking at how two European trading companies, basically corporations, managed to become political masters of the Indian subcontinent.
Right. And our focus is on the Carnatic Wars. It's the perfect case study.
It really is. Our mission here is to trace that transformation.
Hmm.
How do you go from trading pepper and cloth to, picking kings and conquering territory?
It's like a kind of geopolitical alchemy, isn't it? You're watching these commercial entities turn into sovereign powers. And it all happens because you have this perfect storm of a power vacuum meeting, just ruthless ambition.
Okay, so let's set that stage. Let's talk about that power vacuum. We're in 18th century South India.
Yeah.
Why was it even possible for outsiders to meddle like this?
Well, it all comes down to the collapse of central authority, the mighty Mughal Empire. After the death of the Emperor Aurangzeb in 1707, it just starts to decompose.
So that top-down control that held everything together is gone.
It's gone. And what pops up in its place are these regional states. They're powerful, sure, but they're also really unstable. The sources show them constantly fighting each other for dominance. They don't have that old imperial glue holding them together.
So you've got these Nawabs and Nizams acting like kings, but the whole system is fragile.
Extremely fragile. And then you get the one event that just blows the doors wide open for European interference.
The one that really kicks it all off.
It's the death of Nizam-ul-Mulk in 1748. You have to understand, this guy was the power in the South. He was this larger-than-life figure controlling this huge area, including Hyderabad and the Carnatic.
And when he dies?
Instant power vacuum. A massive succession crisis. Suddenly, the two richest thrones in the entire region are up for grabs. And the French and the English, who are sitting right there in their trading posts, they smell blood in the water.
So you have the perfect chaotic environment. And you have these two rivals, the English and French East India Companies, ready to pounce. What was their end game here?
Their goal had really changed. It wasn't just about trade anymore. The sources are clear on this. The new mantra was buy cheap and sell dear. And the best way to do that...
Control the politics?
Exactly. If you can install your own guy as the local ruler, you get everything. You get tax exemptions, monopolies on goods. You can force weavers to sell to you at rock-bottom prices. It's the ultimate business strategy.
They stopped being merchants and became kingmakers.
That's the perfect way to put it. Political control wasn't the goal. It was the most efficient tool for maximizing profit.
But why the South? Why the Carnatic? Why not go for Bengal, which everyone knew was the richest prize?
It was just the path of least resistance. I mean, up in the north, you still had strong rulers like Alivardi Khan in Bengal. He wasn't going to let some European company push him around. Not yet.
And the West?
The West was dominated by the Maratha Confederacy, a huge military power. No one was ready to take them on at this point.
So the South was the weak spot.
It was the perfect combination. You had valuable trading ports like Madras and Pondicherry, and you had this ready-made political chaos from the Nizam's death. It was strategically vulnerable. It was an open invitation.
That context is so important. Okay, so we have the motive and the opportunity. Let's jump into the first major clash, the First Carnatic War. And the funny thing is, it had almost nothing to do with India, did it?
Not at its root, no. The whole thing was basically a sideshow. The real conflict was thousands of miles away in Europe, the War of Austrian Succession, which had been raging since 1740.
So it's just a spillover effect?
It is.
Yeah.
In fact, the French governor in India, a man named Dupleix, he actually tried to keep the peace.
Really?
Oh, yeah. He proposed a kind of gentleman's agreement. Let's you and I just keep trading, let the kings fight it out back in Europe. He knew a war in India would be incredibly expensive.
But the British didn't go for it.
The British Navy was, let's say, more aggressive. They rejected the idea and immediately started seizing French ships. That's what lit the fuse in India.
So the British start the fight, and the French are forced to respond.
And they respond decisively. Dupleix gets reinforcements from the French base in Mauritius, and they launch an attack on the main British settlement.
Madras.
They captured Madras in 1746. And there's a fascinating little piece of historical trivia here. A young British clerk named Robert Clive was actually taken prisoner during the fall of Madras.
Wow. No idea. So the man who would basically build the British Empire starts his career as a French prisoner of war.
A brief and I'm sure very humbling moment for him.
But the capture of Madras isn't the real story of this war, is it? The truly wine-changing event was a battle that happened shortly after the Battle of St. Tome.
This is it. This is the aha moment. This is the single event that changes the entire strategic calculation for Europeans in India.
So what happened? The French have Madras, and the local Indian ruler is not happy about it.
Not at all. The defeated British run to the local sovereign, the Nawab of Carnatic, a man named Anwaruddin, and they say, look, these French upstarts have taken this city in your territory. It's an insult to your authority.
And Anwaruddin decides to step in and put them in their place.
He does. He sends a massive traditional Indian army to crush them. We're talking 10,000 men, cavalry, infantry, the whole works. A proper army.
10,000. And the French force they were facing.
It was tiny. Absolutely minuscule. It was just 230 Europeans and about 700 Indian troops or sepoys that the French had trained themselves.
So they're outnumbered 10-1. This should be a slaughter.
It should have been, but it was a different kind of slaughter. That tiny, disciplined French force completely annihilated the Nawab's army.
How? What was the difference?
Discipline and technology. The Nawab's army was relying on old tactics, like mass cavalry charges, just overwhelming numbers. The French used disciplined volley fire with their muskets, and, this is the key, mobile field artillery.
So the Indian army couldn't even get close.
They couldn't. They were just mown down by coordinated, concentrated firepower before their numbers could mean anything. It was a tactical revolution.
What must Dupleix have thought, seeing this result?
He understood its implications instantly. The lesson from St. Tome was profound and terrifying. A small, well-trained, European-style army could destroy a vastly larger, traditional Indian force.
Numbers didn't matter anymore.
Not against discipline. And Dupleix realized he didn't need to ship thousands of soldiers from France. He could train local Indian soldiers, sepoys, in European methods, give them better weapons, and create an unstoppable army on the cheap.
It's not just a military victory, it's a political blueprint for conquest.
It's the whole playbook, right there. But the irony is, after this revolutionary discovery, the war itself just ends.
Right. The Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748.
Yeah, it just ends the European war. And as part of the deal, Madras is given back to the British in exchange for a fort in North America. Everything goes back to how it was before, status quo ante.
On paper, maybe, but in reality, everything had changed. The traders now knew they could beat the kings.
And Dupleix was ready to put that knowledge into practice.
Which brings us directly to the Second Carnatic War. If the first one was a European affair, this one was pure Indian politics, just supercharged with European money and guns.
That's the perfect description. This war was driven entirely by Dupleix's ambition, applying that lesson from St. Tome. This wasn't France versus Britain anymore. This was about being a kingmaker.
Okay, so it gets complicated here. It's like a big game of chess. Let's lay out the two main chessboards.
Right. You've got two succession crises happening at the same time. The big one is for the throne of Hyderabad, between the old Nizam's son, Nasir Jung, and his grandson, Muzaffar Jung.
And the second one?
The second is for the rulership of the Carnatic, the region where the Europeans actually were. That was a fight between a claimant named Chanda Sahib and the son of the old Nawab, Muhammad Ali.
And the two companies immediately pick sides, forming rival teams.
Of course. Dupleix and the French-backed Chanda Sahib for the Carnatic and Muzaffar Jung for Hyderabad. The British, seeing Dupleix's power growing, naturally backed the other guys, Muhammad Ali and Nasir Jung.
So these local fights instantly become proxy wars.
Exactly. And for the first couple of years, from 1749 to 1750, Dupleix is just on an incredible winning streak. It looks like he can't lose.
He achieves total French dominance in the south.
He really does. First, at the Battle of Amber in 1749, his alliance kills the British-backed Nawab, and he puts his guy, Chanda Sahib, on the throne of the Carnatic. Then he turns to Hyderabad. Through some brilliant maneuvering and military force, he gets the British candidate, Nasir Jung, killed and installs his puppet, Muzaffar Jung, as the Nizam.
Checkmate. Dupleix is now the most powerful man in South India.
He absolutely is. He's even made the honorary governor of all Mughal lands south of the Krishna River. It's the absolute peak of French power, but he knows he needs to make it permanent, and that's where his best general, the Marquis de Bussy, comes in.
Tell us about Bussy. He's the one who secures the real prize, isn't he?
He is. Bussy is stationed with a French force in Hyderabad to basically prop up the French-backed Nizam. And in payment for this protection, he secures a huge concession for France, the Northern Circles.
And the Northern Circles. This isn't just some random piece of land.
No, this is a strategic masterstroke. It's a rich, long strip of coastal territory. It connects the French base at Pondicherry to their northern trading routes, and most importantly, it gives France its own independent source of revenue.
They can collect taxes.
They can collect taxes. They're no longer dependent on handouts from the Nizam or subsidies from Paris. They have a permanent cash flow funding their ambitions in India. From a strategic point of view, the French position looks completely unbeatable.
But of course it wasn't. The British position looks hopeless. Their guy, Muhammad Ali, is trapped in a fortress at Trichinopoli. They're about to be wiped out.
And this is where desperation meets genius. The British are saved by that same young clerk who was a prisoner just a few years earlier, Robert Clive.
And he comes up with this insane, brilliant plan.
It's a Hail Mary, really. He proposes a diversion. He says, look, everyone is focused on besieging our guy at Trichinopoli, so let's do the last thing they'd expect. Let's attack Arcot.
The capital of the Carnatic.
The capital. It's symbolically important, but Clive gambles that it's lightly defended because Chanda Sahib has all his best troops at Trichinopoli. The idea is to create a crisis that forces Chanda Sahib to pull his army away from the main siege.
So the famous Siege of Arcot in 1751. Tell us about the numbers, because they're just staggering.
They're unbelievable. Clive marches on Arcot and captures it with just 210 men, a mix of Europeans and sepoys.
210.
And then he has to hold it. He holds the city for 53 days against a force of about 4,000 of Chanda Sahib's troops. It's an epic feat of endurance and leadership.
And it has the exact psychological effect Clive was hoping for.
It completely changes the narrative. Suddenly, the British don't look like losers anymore. This heroic defense of Arcot signals to other Indian powers, like the Marathas and Mysore, that maybe the British are the winning horse to back after all.
So they switch sides.
They switch sides, join the British, and the whole French alliance collapses. Chanda Sahib is eventually caught and killed. The French candidate is gone, the British one is saved, the tide is turned.
It's an amazing military comeback, but the final blow to Dupleix doesn't come from Clive, does it? It comes from his own government.
It does, and it's the great tragedy of his career. Dupleix was a political genius, but he was a terrible accountant.
All these wars and bribes were expensive.
Incredibly expensive. He'd spent a fortune from the French company's coffers to fund his schemes. And back in Paris, the government, which was more worried about its own wars in Europe, just saw a massive financial black hole.
So they pull the plug on him.
They recall him in disgrace in 1754. Despite being on the verge of total victory just a few years earlier, he's fired. His replacement is told to make peace at any cost. So it wasn't a British general who beat Dupleix. It was his own company's balance sheet.
An amazing rise and fall. Okay, so that brings us to the third and final round. The Third Carnatic War, the decider.
And once again, the trigger is a war back in Europe. The 7 Years' War breaks out in 1756. But this time, everyone knows this is it. This is for all the marbles in India.
And to lead this final crucial fight, France sends a new commander, Count de Lally. And, well, he was a terrible choice.
He was a disaster. The sources describe him as brave, personally courageous, but strategically incompetent. And worse, he was arrogant, rude, and he alienated everybody. His own officers, his Indian allies. He destroyed morale before the first shot was even fired.
And his arrogance leads him to make what is probably the single worst strategic mistake of the entire conflict.
The fatal blunder. He decides he needs to concentrate all his forces for one big push against the British in the Carnatic. And to do that, he recalls General Bussy from Hyderabad.
Bussy, the guy who was holding on to the northern circus. The French cash machine.
The cash machine. By recalling Bussy, Lally voluntarily gives up the northern circus. He dismantles the entire French political structure in Hyderabad and cuts off their only reliable source of money.
That's strategic suicide.
It's like cutting your own supply lines before the biggest battle of your life. The British, of course, just walk right in and take over the circus. So now, the British have even more money to fund their war, and the French have none.
And this all sets the stage for the final showdown, the Battle of Wandiwash in 1760.
This is the battle that settles it. The British general, Coote, meets Lally's army, and it's not even close. He completely routs the French. It's a crushing, decisive victory.
And that's basically the end.
That's the end of the fighting. The British then besiege and capture the main French base at Pondicherry in 1761. The French dream is over.
And the final peace treaty, the Peace of Paris in 1763, just puts the official stamp on it.
It does. The French get Pondicherry back, which sounds nice, but there's a devastating catch in the fine print.
They weren't allowed to build any forts.
Exactly. They were forbidden from fortifying it. This meant they could be traitors. but they could never again be a military or political threat to the British. The treaty permanently reduced them to just a commercial presence. The road to a British empire in India was now completely clear.
It's an incredible story. Okay, so we've gone through the battles and the intrigue, but to really understand this, we need to zoom out. Let's analyze the deep structural reasons why ultimately did the French fail.
Right, because on the surface, with a leader like Dupleix, they should have had a real shot. But there were these fundamental weaknesses. I think we can break it down into about 6 key areas.
Okay, let's start with number one, the very nature of the two companies. A private enterprise versus a state-run one.
That's the heart of it. The British East India Company was a private corporation. It was lean, mean, and obsessed with the bottom line. Its directors in London were shareholders, they were motivated by profit, and that made the company incredibly dynamic and financially independent.
And the French company?
The French company was basically a department of the state. It was controlled by King Louis VIII. Its directors were political appointees who often cared more about their status at court than about, the price of tea in India. It was slow, bureaucratic, and totally dependent on government subsidies.
Which means if the king was broke or distracted, so is the company.
Exactly. And that leads right into the second point, the governments themselves. France was an autocratic monarchy, and under Louis XV, it was becoming increasingly inefficient and corrupt.
While Britain was moving in the other direction.
Right. Britain was run by an oligarchy, sure, but it was a stable constitutional system. Its financial system was the most advanced in the world. So the British company had a much more stable and reliable government backing it up.
Okay, point 3 is about focus. Or for the French, a lack of it.
A total lack of it. France was always obsessed with its continental ambitions. It was constantly pouring money and soldiers into wars in Europe, trying to expand its borders against Austria or Prussia. India was always a sideshow.
Whereas for Britain, an island nation,
the colonies and the sea lanes were the main show. Britain's entire strategy was focused on maritime trade and colonial expansion. They weren't splitting their resources. They had a single-minded focus that the French just couldn't match.
And that focus on the sea brings us to point 4, naval power.
This might be the most decisive military factor. The British Royal Navy was simply superior to the French fleet. And what that means in a colonial war is everything.
You control the supply lines.
You control everything. The British could blockade French ports in India, preventing reinforcements, money, and supplies from ever arriving. Meanwhile, their own ships could move freely. The French in India were effectively isolated, fighting with whatever they had on hand. It's an impossible situation.
It's a logistical stranglehold. But now we come to what you've called the financial linchpin, the single factor that gave the British an unbeatable edge in the final war. The Bengal factor.
This is the killer advantage. You have to remember the timing. The British conquer Bengal at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. That's right before the decisive phase of the Third Carnatic War really kicks off.
And Bengal was the richest province in India.
By far. So suddenly, the British East India Company gets control of the tax revenue of Bengal. It's an immense, endless river of cash generated right there in India.
So they're not waiting on ships from London anymore.
They don't need them. They are funding their entire war effort, paying soldiers, buying weapons, bribing allies with Indian money. The French are still begging for subsidies from a nearly bankrupt king in Paris. The British are writing a blank check for their own war.
It's an insurmountable financial advantage. The war was essentially won in the counting houses of Bengal, not just on the battlefields of the Carnatic.
It absolutely was. The French were doomed from the moment the British took control of that revenue.
Okay, and finally, let's touch on leadership. Because it seems like the British just had better people at the right time.
They really did. The French had Dupleix, who was a genius but financially reckless. And then they followed him with Lally, who was just incompetent. It's a huge swing from brilliant to awful.
Well, the British
had consistency. They had Clive, this audacious gambler who delivered the masterstroke at Arcot when they were desperate. And then they had Erkut, a solid, disciplined professional soldier who delivered the final military victory at Wandiwash. They just had a deeper bench of capable leaders.
That is an incredible breakdown. All right, for everyone listening, let's just quickly boil this all down. A quick recap of the 3 wars, the key takeaways.
Okay, first up, the First War. Remember, it starts in Europe, but the big takeaway is the Battle of Saint-Omer. The lesson. A small, disciplined army wins. That's the blueprint.
The Second War. This one is all about Indian politics and proxy armies.
Right. This is Dupleix at his peak, French dominance, the Northern Circars, but then Clive's incredible comeback at Arcot and Dupleix's own financial ruin.
And the Third War. The final act.
The 7 Years' War comes back. You get Lally's catastrophic blunder recalling Bussy, the British using Bengal's money to fund everything, the decisive defeat at Wandiwash, and the peace treaty that ends France as a power in India for good.
A perfect summary. And as we wrap up, I want to go back to that very first moment you highlighted. That small battle, St. Thome, in 1746.
You know, when you really step back and look at it, that one little skirmish is one of the most important battles in modern history. It wasn't about the land they won or lost that day. It was about proving a concept.
The concept that European military methods were unstoppable.
Exactly. It demonstrated beyond any doubt that a small, commercially funded corporate entity could shatter the military power of a huge traditional kingdom. That single lesson, that tactical discipline and firepower could make numbers irrelevant. That's what changed the course of Indian history.
It's what allowed the traders to become the conquerors.
It's the whole story. The move from a company that wanted contracts to a sovereign power that ruled a subcontinent. It was all made possible by the disciplined volley of a few hundred muskets in that one battle. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What seemingly minor event is happening today that's quietly proving the viability of a new kind of power, one that's going to completely reshape our world tomorrow. That's the real legacy of these wars.